A crowd of angry commoners gathers to witness a public event from a high platform, their faces filled with anticipation as they look up at the sky. Below them, a large platform sits in the middle of a swirling arena while scribes frantically write down every detail of the proceedings with their quills. The scene focuses on a heavy iron chain, symbolizing the capture and restraint of a prisoner, before pulling back to reveal a massive amphitheater filled with spectators. A document is held up, formally announcing that the execution of Arthur Pendragon has been carried out. The story then shows Arthur, a disheveled young man with light hair, being led forward in heavy chains. People in the crowd whisper among themselves, noting that the chains are specifically designed to suppress his unique powers, a fact which another spectator grimly confirms. Arthur is known as the prince with demonic powers, and the pained faces of the people who suffered under his rule flash before him. As he is pulled along by the chains, he looks dazed and overwhelmed by the vast, hateful crowd. In a moment of desperation, Arthur screams out, questioning what he ever did wrong. He wonders if his fate was sealed because he never used his powers to help the common people, remembering a time when he, as a young boy, held a child with complete indifference. He then clutches his head in anguish, questioning if his downfall was because he never even tried to understand the suffering of his subjects. A guard yanks on his chains, yelling at him to stay down, and Arthur stumbles to the ground. He continues to wonder if there was another reason for his tragic end. In the darkness of his thoughts, a horrifying realization dawns on him. Perhaps his greatest sin was that he never did anything at all. At that moment, he is approached by another young man. Arthur weakly identifies him as his big brother, but the man, Mordred, simply looks down at him with a cold and unreadable expression. Mordred's words echo in Arthur's mind, telling him that he never once cared about anyone else's feelings. As Arthur is dragged across the execution platform, he finally understands what it feels like to be hurt and wounded, realizing the immense physical and emotional pain of it all. He is then forced onto a guillotine, his head locked in place as skeletal figures seem to loom over him, representing the finality of death. He cries that no one had ever told him what this kind of pain felt like. His mind flashes back to his pampered childhood on a throne, where he was always told that as long as everyone obeyed him, nothing else mattered. As he lies on the guillotine, he thinks that if only he had the chance to start his life over, things could be different. An executioner asks him for any last words, and Arthur, knowing this is the end, looks down in sorrow. The massive blade of the guillotine is released and begins its descent. His very last thought is to wonder how much the impact is going to hurt. Suddenly, Arthur screams and jolts awake, finding himself on the floor of a beautiful, luxurious room. He is completely bewildered, touching his chest in disbelief and questioning if he is somehow still alive. He jumps up and sees that all the jewelry confiscated during the revolution and the precious gems gifted to him by nobles are back in his possession. Rushing to the window, he sees the grand castle, which he vividly remembers being burned to the ground, standing perfectly intact. He pants for breath, wondering what other parts of his nightmare were real. Just then, a group of overly cheerful maids enters his room, wishing Prince Arthur a good morning. When a maid announces that breakfast is served, Arthur is shocked, explaining that he hasn't eaten a proper meal in ages, as he only had stale bread and watery soup after the revolutionaries captured him. The maids fall silent at his strange outburst, and he quickly tries to convince himself that everything was just a terrible nightmare. Later, as he walks past a portrait of himself, he confidently declares that he is destined for a glorious future and could never be executed. He fails to notice two maids whispering about why he is staring so intensely at his own painting. The maids continue to gossip, wondering if he will complain and have the painter punished, concluding that Prince Arthur never cared about commoners anyway. Arthur overhears them and mentally chastises himself for his old, arrogant thoughts. A moment later, a panicked chef runs in to announce that the flour delivery has been delayed, meaning there is no bread for breakfast. Falling back into his old, careless persona, Arthur dismisses the problem and flippantly declares that they should just serve cake instead, still believing that everything in his life goes his way. While eating, he tries to reassure himself that this is his normal, perfect life, but he overhears the maids whispering about his insensitive, serve cake comment. Realizing he's been overheard, Arthur abruptly gets up from the table and tells them to bring tea to his room before storming off. The maids simply watch him go, remarking that he probably heard them but not seeming to care. Alone, Arthur slumps against his closed door, the reality of his situation crashing down on him. It wasn't just a dream. He was supposed to be a prince blessed by fate, yet he can't understand why the memory of those torturous days feels so painfully real. Looking at his hands, he is terrified by how vivid the recollections are. He grips his head in pain as the memories flood back. The rebellion led by his brother Mordred reaching the capital, his own capture while screaming about treason, and his pleas to Mordred. He remembers offering to pay off the people with gold, only for Mordred to inform him his fortune had run out long ago. He recalls desperately offering to speak to the nobles, but Mordred coldly told him they had already fled and that Arthur hadn't changed at all. The memories continue with the brutal beatings in the dungeon, Mordred asking if he finally understood the commoner's suffering and his final goodbye. Arthur remembers wishing he could use his powers, causing him to clutch his head in anguish. He recalls how after the rebellion he was locked away and tormented daily by the very people he once ruled. After each day of torture, the same young woman would always enter his cell. She would greet him, gently take his broken arm, and with a soft smile, she would always ask if he was in pain. Back in the present, Arthur is kneeling on the floor of his room, utterly convinced that every detail of the nightmare was too real to be fake. Just then, a voice behind him asks what he's doing sitting there. Arthur looks up in absolute shock and terror. Leaning over him is the very same woman from his nightmare, now working as one of his maids. With a strange look on her face, she asks him the exact same haunting question, "Are you in pain?" Stunned by the maid's familiar question, Arthur reels back in shock, realizing she is the same woman from his nightmarish memories. He panics and screams at her not to come any closer, accidentally knocking over a small table in his haste. Flustered, Arthur tries to justify his extreme reaction by blaming her for entering his room without knocking, insisting to himself that his actions were merely self-defense. In the commotion, the maid steadies herself, looking down at her now scraped and bleeding hand. Arthur sees her injury, and for a moment, he is paralyzed by his own traumatic memories of pain, thinking that anyone who hurts him must be an enemy. However, the maid looks up at him with genuine concern and asks if he is the one who is hurt. Her unexpected kindness startles him. He recalls how this girl was the only one who showed him any compassion in that filthy prison. Confused by his conflicting memories, Arthur clutches his head and cries out that he doesn't know what is real anymore, as all he can truly remember is the immense pain. The maid's gentle voice cuts through his panic as she asks again if he is hurt. Calming down, Arthur assures her he is fine and then takes her injured hand, observing that it must hurt. As the maid apologizes, Arthur decides to act, telling her that he will heal her with his special ability. A warm light emanates from his hands as he uses his healing magic, completely mending the cuts and scrapes on her skin. After the healing is complete, the maid confirms that the pain is gone, but she becomes flustered, telling Arthur that he shouldn't waste such a precious power on a commoner like her. She then gives him a sincere thank you, leaving Arthur surprised by her humility. The maid, embarrassed by her outburst, quickly apologizes and says she will go find a broom before scurrying out of the room. Arthur watches her leave, thinking to himself that this was the first time he had ever healed a commoner. He remembers his tutor, Goyak, sternly warning him as a child that his healing magic was incredibly precious and must only be used under supervision. Back then, Arthur had only interpreted this to mean he was amazing. In the present, he stands in his library and decides he must report the incident to his tutor. While searching the shelves, he discovers a ragged-looking diary. He opens it and is horrified to read an entry from the future that details the start of a revolution and his own execution by guillotine. Panicked, Arthur throws the book, but his curiosity wins over his fear. He picks it up again and reads on, discovering that his younger brother, Mordred, will lead the revolution, resulting in Arthur's capture and imprisonment at age 20. The final entry confirms his worst fears. He will be tortured and then executed. The terrible realization sinks in that time has rewound, and this grim fate is the future that awaits him. He collapses in despair, clutching the book and desperately wondering if there is any way to avoid it. Meanwhile, the maid he healed reports the incident to Goyak. The tutor is immediately suspicious, noting that the prince has never shown any interest in charity before. He menacingly corners the maid, accusing her of seducing Arthur. The other maids watch helplessly, with one even trying to pressure the girl into complying with the noble's wishes. Just then, Arthur appears and sternly demands to know what Goyak is doing to his maid. Goyak quickly dismisses the situation as a simple scolding, but Arthur stops him from leaving, declaring that they need to have a chat. He slyly asks to see the financial records, much to Goyak's visible discomfort. To manipulate the situation, Arthur offers to reward Goyak for his hard work by healing his stiff shoulders. He then brings up the maid's burn marks and blisters, noting that nobles rarely suffer such injuries. He reminds Goyak of a countess he once brought over who complained of sore hands from counting coins, a story she told because she came from a merchant family. Arthur then grabs Goyak's hands, pointing out that they have the same kind of blisters and no protective oils on the fingertips. He calls out Goyak's lie, revealing he knows Goyak is also from a merchant family and has been embezzling his money. As the other maids gasp at the revelation, Arthur pins his tutor down and demands the records. Goyak, terrified by the prince's sudden growth and intelligence, quickly scrambles away. After the confrontation, the maids congratulate Arthur for standing up for one of their own. Feeling a surge of confidence, Arthur admits to himself that he bluffed his way through the encounter but is still haunted by the timeline in the diary. As he walks through a moonlit garden, satisfied with his small victory, the pages of the diary suddenly begin to rip themselves out. He panics, but then notices that the entry about Goyak stealing his fortune has vanished. A magical, doll-like creature emerges from the book and announces that the future has slightly changed. It reveals that a new line has been added to the timeline. The maid's friend opposes the execution. The creature explains that by healing the maid and exposing Goyak's scheme, Arthur has earned a good deed point. Staring at his hand, Arthur begins to wonder if his actions truly have the power to change his grim destiny. The maid, whose hand Arthur healed, is in distress, believing her short life as a servant is over. She is approached by the head maid, Marianne, who asks what happened. The young maid is too overwhelmed to speak, so Marianne calmly tells her to just explain. Later, she excitedly tells Marianne that Prince Arthur has asked her to be his personal maid, a title only given to the most trusted servants. Marianne is surprised, and the maid explains that at first, things were going well. She recalls how Arthur explained his plan to earn good deeds by healing commoners, thinking it would be easier to win them over with her help, as she was more familiar with them. He asked her to become his personal maid so they could heal everyone who was injured, one by one. She remembers how happy all the healed people were, but she also noticed that Prince Arthur looked incredibly sad, which she couldn't understand. Overwhelmed by the responsibility, she felt like a complete failure. Lost in thought, she confides in Marianne that she doesn't have the confidence to be his personal maid. Marianne firmly slaps her twice, once for herself and once for the prince, explaining that Arthur must have had his reasons for choosing her, even if they couldn't fully understand them. Determined, the young maid resolves to understand why he chose her and what he wishes her to do. Marianne speculates that Arthur likely carries his own burdens and perhaps chose the maid because she reminds him of his mother, who was also a commoner. Another maid then suggests that nobles have twisted hobbies, and perhaps Arthur has some sort of baby play fetish, handing the confused maid a pacifier. Marianne blushes furiously and denies it, but still wishes her good luck. The maid then finds Arthur by a fountain, looking melancholic as he stares at the unupdating notebook. Gathering her courage, she decides to act on the baby play idea to cheer him up. She begins rolling around on the grass, but Arthur, annoyed by the noise, simply asks her to make him a bed so he can rest. Confused but determined, she offers him her lap as a pillow. He reluctantly agrees but complains he can't see the sky. Frustrated, he gets up and asks her to make him tea with extra milk, which she quickly agrees to do. When he asks if she can do anything else, she impulsively offers herself to him, causing him to storm off to his room in embarrassment. Later that night, the maid, still worried about the prince, decides to try one last resort. She changes into revealing lingerie and enters his room, only to find him asleep. She quietly approaches his bed, hoping her presence might make him feel better. As she leans over him, Arthur stirs and murmurs her name, revealing he was having a scary dream. He apologizes for his earlier behavior, admitting he never truly saw any of the maids as people and that he didn't even know her name. He confesses that his past attitude is what led to his terrible fate and that he never understood people's hearts. The maid listens patiently, admitting she can't fully understand his circumstances as a commoner, but she has always tried to help when she sees someone in need. She tells him that when he doesn't understand something he should just ask someone, and if that's hard, he can always ask her. She proposes they figure things out together. Arthur agrees, promising that this time, he will actually try. Seeing him smile, she feels a sense of relief, and they share a moment of understanding. The next day, Arthur greets the maids, specifically calling out Marianne by name. He tells them he has decided to get to know all of them properly. The maids are overjoyed, excitedly introducing themselves as Lilia and Elise. Arthur is overwhelmed by their enthusiasm but happy. He then turns to the maid from the previous night and asks for her name. She introduces herself as Kay, and with a smile, agrees to be his personal maid, marking the beginning of Arthur's new life. As they walk together, Arthur excitedly notes in his magic diary that he has earned another good deed point, feeling that being called by name is nice. He calls out Kay's name again, just because he wanted to, a simple act that feels new and significant to him since only relatives and nobles had ever used his name before. He muses that fiancés probably do that too, just as a beautiful woman is seen approaching in the distance. While having a meal with Kay, Arthur proudly eats onions, a food he normally hates, surprising his maid. He explains that since Kay chopped them for him, he can eat them, and he wants to start helping people as soon as possible. Kay praises his noble sentiment, comparing it to the principle of noblesse oblige, the belief that the privileged should dedicate themselves to the people. The phrase strikes a chord with Arthur, reminding him of someone he knows. Suddenly, a paper airplane hits Arthur in the head. He initially thinks it's a bird and complains about the bad luck, but Kay points out the writing on it. Unfolding the paper, they are both shocked to find it covered in nasty insults. Arthur immediately knows who sent it, realizing that simply mentioning noblesse oblige is enough to summon the sender. Just then, a sophisticated young noblewoman named Morgan Le Fay appears, greeting them with perfect timing and asking Arthur if he would like some tea. Kay, misunderstanding the situation, offers to leave them alone, but Arthur frantically stops her, warning that she doesn't know what Morgan is really like. He recalls their first meeting when he was a child. After he carelessly remarked about serving cake when there was no bread, an 11-year-old Morgan had scolded him, explaining that both are made of wheat. She then presented him with a pile of letters, revealing they were all complaints from the people. She warned him that a revolution would come soon if he didn't fix the problems immediately. Overwhelmed, young Arthur had a major meltdown, and Morgan called him foolish and ignorant. Back in the present, Kay is shocked to learn that Arthur and Morgan don't get along, and Arthur declares that being engaged to her is a nightmare. As Kay nervously brings tea and sweets, Morgan dismisses her with a polite, "Thank you," after hearing her name, which impresses Kay. Morgan then turns her attention back to Arthur, harshly reminding him of his "eat cake" comment while the commoners struggle for food. She grabs him by the collar, telling him he reminds her of the foolish prince she once knew. She states she has real work to do, unlike him, and warns that the revolution is coming if he doesn't change his ways before leaving. After she is gone, Arthur finds another note from her and gets upset, while Kay feels sorry for him. Later, Arthur recalls Morgan confronting Goyak about embezzling funds and vowing to have him dismissed to purge corruption from the royal family. She had presented a stack of complaints she gathered herself from the people. Goyak had dismissed her accusations as petty, claiming the voice of the people meant nothing against royal power. Just as he was about to lash out, Kay jumped in to protect Arthur, reminding Goyak of the principle of noblesse oblige. Goyak, seeing Prince Arthur's intervention, tried to appeal to him, but Arthur, hiding behind Kay, simply told his tutor to handle it himself. Back in the present, Arthur remembers how he believed Goyak's lies and how Morgan had been trying to destabilize the royal family with rumors of a revolution. He now understands that she wasn't the one he needed to fear. Morgan, sensing his realization, appears again and admits the revolution talk was just a joke to get his attention, as the one she truly wants gone is him. Arthur, finally understanding her true intentions, tells Morgan he believes her, confirming that the revolution she spoke of is indeed coming. Morgan is taken aback, and Arthur explains that his good deed points, represented by the scattered papers, are proof. He now understands that she was trying to help him all along. Suddenly, Kay rushes over to comfort Arthur, who she thinks is scared. Later, while Kay is trying to calm a panicked Arthur, he picks up the nasty letters, realizing they could be used in court. He then finds a proper letter from Morgan. Kay reads it and is shocked to discover that it's not a list of insults, but a collection of desperate pleas from the people. The wheat harvest is failing, a child wants to go to school, and there's an outbreak in the slums. Kay tries to hide the letter from Arthur, but Morgan appears and confirms that he has finally seen the truth. Arthur, remembering his execution, tells Morgan he believes her. With newfound determination, he reaches out to her and declares that she will take him to help the people, embracing the true meaning of noblesse oblige. Morgan, flustered by his sudden change, agrees to take him to her district, Avalon, which is full of people in need. As they prepare to leave, Arthur thanks her, and Kay celebrates his good decision. Morgan, however, can't help but comment on how foolish and ignorant Arthur still seems. Despite her harsh words, she is secretly pleased that he is at least no longer running away. As they depart, she reflects on how Arthur always seems to show up exactly when she needs him, a growing suspicion forming in her mind that he might somehow know the future.